Hello and welcome to the Sexual Happiness Podcast from Lovehoney, the podcast where we answer your questions about sex and sex toys. I'm Nick, head of editorial here at Lovehoney, and this week I'm delighted to be joined by one of Lovehoney's resident sexperts and certified sexologist, Cam Fraser, and we are going to be talking all about tantric sex. So welcome, Cam.
Hey man, thanks for having me back on.
So Cam, do you want to tell us and our listeners a little bit about yourself?
So obviously my name's Cam. I am a sexologist and I also work as a men's sex coach. And I guess like the work that I try and do, it integrates the kind of like medically accurate, scientifically validated sexual health education with the, let's say, spiritual and esoteric teachings from the more kind of mystical traditions. And, I find a lot of value in both of those worlds. And so I try and blend those together in the content that I produce and the education that I offer. It's taken a while for me to get there. And I've done a whole bunch of, journeying around the world, which has been really fantastic. I feel very privileged to be able to do that. And part of that has been like yoga teacher training and meditation and plant medicine and things like this. So I feel I used to work as a tantric yoga teacher. So I feel very this conversation is going to bring back some nostalgia for me from an earlier part of my career.
Excellent. Well, this is why we got you on to talk about tantric sex, because we understand you are the person to talk to. But before we get into that world of tantric sex, it's time for our You Can Never Know Enough About Sex section. And this is where we share an interesting fact that we've discovered over the course of the last week. So have you got a fact for us, Cam? You found anything?
I do, man. And this is like this is a bit of a geeky fact. This is a bit of a nerdy fact. It's got to do with sex research because I'm writing a script for a video that I'm doing for my YouTube channel about erectile dysfunction and the history of it. And so I found out just yesterday, actually, that the questionnaire that we often use in terms of research and also as a diagnostic tool to determine if someone's got erectile dysfunction is called the IIEFT5, which is the 5-item version of the International Index of Erectile Function. But this questionnaire was developed in 1997. It was actually funded by Pfizer. And Pfizer, for people that don't know, is the company that produces Viagra. So we've got this diagnostic tool that we're using to diagnose people with erectile dysfunction that is also, was created by the people that are trying to sell us the erectile dysfunction medication. So there's a massive conflict of interest there. But for some reason, 22 or so years later, we still use this same research questionnaire. We still use the same diagnostic tool. And I just find that super interesting that there's this glaring conflict of interest. And I'm not saying it's conspiratorial or there's some nefarious intentions. I just thought that maybe we shouldn't be necessarily using this this company's diagnostic criteria because they're trying to sell us that medication as well. So that's what I found out yesterday. And I was like, wow, that's pretty intense.
Intense is the word, yeah. Well, what are we going to do with that information?
I don't know about it. Yeah, I'm still processing it myself.
Brilliant. So I've looked at what's been going on in the news around sex and sex facts this week, and I found that social media has been set alight by a video of two gorillas even, performing oral sex in front of lots of visitors at the Bronx Zoo. Families, children didn't know where to look. But apparently, according to people who know what they're talking about around animals and sexuality, completely normal. And gorillas, monkeys, and other creatures quite often go at it with the old oral. So,
wow.
Yeah. And as part of the article I read as well, that generally speaking, chimps are pretty boring and they only go for kind of missionary position or doggy style. But bonobos or bonobos, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, the article said it's like they've read the Kama Sutra and they will do everything and anything. We'll get them some free shopping accounts at Lovehoney as well.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah, that's a great sex fact.
With that saying us out of the way, let's move on to our hot topic, which is what is tantric sex and how can you try it? So, Cam, I have to confess that I'm rather ignorant around tantric sex. So I think we're going to take this, the kind of the nuts and bolts of it to start with. So let's just start. What is tantric sex?
Yeah, I guess, and I'll keep this as entry level as possible, I suppose, because there is a whole beautiful historical, philosophical kind of concept of Tantra, which I find it super fascinating, but it's probably not for this particular conversation. But I just wanted to throw that in there, that there is this like really rich lineage of Tantra from northern India, and there's also branches of it in southern India and places in the Himalayas as well. So if people are interested, I highly recommend kind of checking out classical Tantra. But when we're talking about tantric sex in maybe like the lay person's way of thinking about it, that kind of entry level way of thinking about it, we're kind of referring to what's called neo tantra, or maybe new age tantra, or sometimes even called Californian tantra, because of the Western way of kind of thinking about this really ancient spiritual teachings, I suppose. So that's the distinction that I just wanted to offer to begin with, for people that maybe are familiar with more classical tantra, is we're going to be talking about the new age stuff. And essentially, tantric sense in that respect then is it's the principle, I suppose, of like trying to bring more, like for some people, the word sacredness comes to mind, or some sort of depth or spirituality into their sexual experiences, into their sexual acts. And that can be either with themselves, we can practice solo tantric sex, or we can practice tantric sex with a partner or partners. And so that can kind of look a little bit different. The definition here, I suppose, is opening up and becoming a little bit more vague as I kind of talk about it. But the idea is bringing in some more reverence, some sacredness, some depth, some meaning, and some connection into your sexual experience. And the reason why I use that particular definition is because it then starts to lend itself to like thinking of bringing tantric sex into a more, I guess, like we can use it in a bunch of different ways. It doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to look a particular way. And I know we'll get into that, but for just like as a working definition, it's about bringing that deeper reverence, respect, and like we talk about energy in a second as well. It's bringing like that energetic component, that kind of awareness, consciousness, mindfulness component into your sexual experiences. And there's a whole bunch of different ways to do that, which I really find fascinating. But at the kind of definitional level, let's leave it at that.
So do you need to be practicing other forms of kind of yoga or meditation or spiritual, practices, I guess, to be able to get involved in tantric sex?
I don't necessarily think so. I think like some sort of rudimentary kind of understanding of things like, for example, the chakra system, which is essentially a system of mapping energy through the body. It's like a metaphysical way of understanding how areas of the body hold different types of tension, as well as different types of emotions. And the chakra system itself maps into our endocrine glands quite fascinatingly as well. So like a bit of an understanding of that would be helpful, and I can talk a little bit briefly into that as well. But just some it can help, like having that basic knowledge, I suppose, before you start exploring what tantric sex is. But there's also, it's not a necessity. There's ways you can start to explore what tantric sex kind of means for you, and what tantra or neo-tantra means for you, without having a prior background. There's some pretty simple things that you can start to do, which I'm happy to speak into, and I'm keen to share some practicalities as well.
Yeah, so that would be my next question. So how do you get started?
Right.
What's your building block?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing, like I mentioned, I alluded to, was like the chakra system. That's like something to like, if you Google tantric sex, literally every single person talking about tantric sex will mention the chakra system at some point. So to give a very basic understanding of what that is, we can think of the chakras as the 7 primary chakras. A chakra is and I apologize for people that know Sanskrit as well. The word chakra is a Sanskrit term. I'm pronouncing it very Westernized, very Anglo-Saxon. So I apologize for people that know how to pronounce it properly. The idea behind a chakra is that it's a locus of energy in your body, or it's a focal point of energy in your body. Chakra means wheel in Sanskrit. And so there's these wheels of energy throughout the body, and there's 7 primary chakras or energy centers in the body. And they like I said, line up with the endocrine system, actually. But if we're thinking like anatomically where they might be, you've got your root or your base chakra, which is your it's kind of your perineum, that space in between the genitals and the anus, sometimes called the root, and it's color coded as well. So it's the color of red. Anodea Judith, for people that are familiar, kind of formulated that whole system of colors and chakras together. And then we move up to, and that's called Muladhara chakra. We move up to what's called Svadhisthana chakra, which is your sex center. It's kind of just above your genitals. It's the color orange. And all these have elements with them as well. So the root chakra is the earth element. The sex or sexual center, the sexual chakra, Svadhisthana chakra, is the water element. There's a lot of symbolism in kind of the mystical traditions, with water being analogous or a metaphor for sexuality and sexual energy, the water symbolism there. We move up a little higher to the solar plexus. This area of the body is known as Manipura chakra, which is the color yellow. It's got the element of fire as well in this area of the body. Then we move up a little higher to the Anahata chakra, which is the heart center or the center of the chest. It's actually the only quote unquote energy center that's found across all spiritual traditions, is the center of the chest. It's the color green and it's the element of air. Then we move up a little higher to the throat. We've got what's called Vishuddha chakra, which is the color blue. This is taken from classical tantra. The deity Shiva has a blue throat. He's known for speaking the truth and for connecting through his voice. Hence the color blue for Vishuddha chakra. And the element is ether. And we move up a little higher to the third eye. This is called Ajna chakra, or the space in between the eyebrows and slightly above. The color is sometimes purple. Purple's the most common color for it. The element is like space, essentially, like spaciousness. And then we move up a little higher to the crown of the head. And this is known as Sahasrara chakra. And the color is typically white, and there is no element. It's the void of elements. And the idea behind tantric sex essentially is to engage with all of those 7 areas of the body and the energies that are associated with them. And so we can kind of think of them as being like, we spoke about the elements, so that they're really dense down the bottom and they get lighter as you go up. And the idea behind that is like, and we'll speak about sexual energy in a second, but sexual energy is this really dense, heavy substance that a lot of us carry around. And the idea behind tantric sex is that you're through sex, through the act of sex and sexual practices, you're heating up that energy. You're starting to awaken it, starting to connect with it, and you want to move it up the body. You want to take it from those kind of lower, denser, heavier areas of the body, particularly Svadhisthana chakra, that orange sexual center, and you want to move that up the spine and up the body and start to connect with the other areas. So I said that mapped onto the endocrine glands. If people are familiar with the endocrine glands, they might be able to pinpoint what those are, but you've got things like the gonads down the bottom, the thyroid, the pineal gland, and things like that. So it's quite a fascinating system of understanding the body that we kind of adapted and took from these ancient traditions. But that's kind of the first thing you can do is just tune in with those areas of your body. Like, how many of us have like said, "Oh, how are my solar plexus feeling right now? How's my perineum feeling right now? Or how's my throat feel?" And so that awareness and that mindfulness, the chakra system just gives you a map of the body to start tuning in. So when you're being sexual, either alone or with your partner, you can start to ask those questions like, "Oh, do I feel any pleasure in my perineum? Do I feel any pleasure in my solar plexus? What about in the center of my chest? Like, what do I notice there?" And oftentimes you might notice some tension in one of these areas of the body. It's very common for us to hold tension in actually all 7 of those areas, but there might be one particular area for you or your partner that stands out. It's very common for us to hold tension around the throat and for us to kind of close down and be tight through the shoulders and the top of the chest and through the clavicles. There's a lot of stigma around making noise, for example, when we're being sexual and for vocalizing our pleasure. So one of the practices of tantric sex, for example, like a very practical thing that you can do is start to make noise. And if you want to be really esoteric about it, you could chant a mantra, or you could be you could say Om, and you could be really spiritual about it. Or if you want to be a bit more, let's say, westernized and not so spiritual about it, you just want to be kind of like, mainstream, just start to tune into like what it feels like to make sound. You could hum, or you could groan or grunt, or just make a noise, and notice how it feels when your throat vibrates. When you're in that heightened state of pleasure, you might find that it's actually quite pleasurable to notice that vibration through the throat. And then does that vibrate a little bit further out, maybe into your chest and into other areas of your body? So it's a very simple, quote unquote, tantric sex practice is making noise. Another one is breath as well. It's a really practical one that's talked about, and all tantric sex teachers will tell you about breathing. And the idea behind it is like, you can control how you feel, right, based on your nervous system, I suppose, the type of nervous system you're engaging with, whether it's your sympathetic nervous system or parasympathetic nervous system, by breathing in a certain way. So if you change your breathing from the thorax up in the chest to breathing down into the diaphragm, down into the belly. If you've ever gone to a yoga class, you'll hear a yoga teacher say, breathe into your belly, breathe down into that lower half of your body. What they're referring to is like engaging the diaphragm when you breathe, because when you do that, you're engaging your parasympathetic nervous system, which is going to help you relax. It's going to help you feel more, literally. And so that's, if we think about where that is on the chakra system, for example, we might be hitting that kind of heart center, that Anahata chakra. We might be hitting the Manipura chakra, the solar plexus, and opening up and relaxing through those areas of the body so that we can feel more through those parts of the body. There's another practice from tantric sex, which is it's almost like a Kegel exercise, and it's called Muladhara Bandha, and Bandha is another Sanskrit word that just means lock, and that's a yogic or a tantric practice, and it's squeezing your pubococcygeal muscle, squeezing your pelvic floor muscles. And the idea behind that is it not only does it help kind of strengthen the sensations and strengthen the muscles around that part of your body, which can lead to maybe a stronger orgasm, but in an energetic sense, it's moving like a pump. It's pumping energy up the spine, up the body, which I was saying before is like one of the principles of tantric sex is you want to move that sexual energy up the spine so that it goes through your whole body. That's just three like really practical things. Is like making noise, is breathing deeply into the belly, and is squeezing your PC muscle. But there's a whole host of other things that you can do, but that's like a real basic introduction, I suppose, mapped onto the chakra system, which is something that's very common.
It's fascinating, this. So you mentioned doing it alone or doing it with couples. What would you say is the best way to get started? Is it to start on your own, or I guess it depends how comfortable you feel with your partner in many ways. But what would your advice be to sort of practicing these techniques?
Yeah, I mean this is my personal philosophy, which is that we should be doing things by ourselves before we maybe start to do them with a partner, so that we get an understanding and a familiarity with them alone, I suppose, and that comfortableness by doing them by ourselves. But like, you'll see a lot of like tantric sex practitioners, I suppose, kind of speaking about the power of doing something with another person. And the reason why there's a lot of emphasis on like partnered practices is because another principle of tantric sex is the idea of sharing energy with another person, or connecting in with their sexual energy and amplifying your own. And one of the things that they'll often talk about, and I say I was one of those people before as well. I can still remember the language. Is the what's called polarity, which is this connection between masculine and feminine energy. And the idea here is that it's energy, not anatomy. It's energy, not biology. So it can be practiced by any two people, essentially. One person tapping into what they feel is their masculine energy, another person tapping into what they feel is their feminine energy, and creating that almost like the two opposite ends of a magnet, creating that kind of polarity, that tension, that sexual chemistry between those two areas. So when you're engaging with another person, that's kind of the idea, is that and that they use a very oftentimes tantra or neo-tantra sexes, they use a very heteronormative example, and so I'll use that example here. So heterosexual couple, the idea behind sharing energy with that person, if you're the man in that heterosexual relationship, is the sexual energy goes out of your what's called lingam, right? So another Sanskrit word, lingam, which is means, from what I understand, wand of light in Sanskrit, but it's a eponym for penis, and that goes right, and so it's penetrative, right? The masculine in a male body is that kind of penetrative energy, the way that's kind of framed in that heteronormative sense. So the energy flows out of the penis and goes into the what's called the yoni, which is the name for, or the Sanskrit name for vagina, and it's the, I think the translation is or I think it's cave. It's some sort of esoteric cave translation from what I remember. But the idea is like that the feminine is receptive. It receives that energy. The feminine, or the woman in this heterosexual kind of encounter, moves that energy up her body and shares from so sends it back out from the heart space. So the feminine is penetrative from the heart. One of the ways of thinking about this anatomically in these scenarios is through the breasts. The breasts are like they express milk, for example, or they kind of give whatever you want to think about it energetically. And so the man receives through the heart in this heterosexual example, right? So and so there's this loop created of sharing sexual energy, I suppose, with each other, and that's oftentimes called the macrocosmic orbit, which is a name that's taken from the Taoist tradition. So you often see like Taoist practices and tantric practices kind of mixed in with each other. There's like a tantric tradition of Buddhism, for example. So there's often some borrowing of phrases and practices. So that's like the quote unquote, that's the power of doing a tantric sex practice with another person, is you have that opportunity, I suppose, to share that energy with that other person and kind of create that amplified experience, which you don't necessarily have an opportunity to do by yourself. And so if you're doing that circling of energy, like I was just describing, when you're alone, that's called the microcosmic orbit. So you're alone, you've just got your own body to work with. You move that energy through your body. The microcosmic, if you're sharing it with another person, it's called the macrocosmic orbit. So that's the kind of reasoning behind why you might want to do it by yourself. My personal philosophy: you can practice things without all the other added pressure from another person. But if you're doing it with another person, you've got the opportunity there to explore these maybe more amplified practices.
I guess for someone who's not really encountered tantric sex before, it sounds like it's something you've got to work at, and it's not, it's not just going to fall in your lap. Oh, I'm doing this now. This is great. So how long do you think it would take to not necessarily master it, but more, start to feel the benefits of it, start to feel, I've done my reading, or in this case, the listening. How long do you think it was, you know what I'm saying? How long would it take?
Yeah. I mean, I've had some, like when I first started exploring this myself, if I was to share like my own experience, like essentially the first time that I tried it, like it changed sex for me, because I hadn't been having sex in that way at all my whole entire life, or my whole entire sexually active life. So when I, a lot of what I'm describing here is like you essentially you're just being a lot more mindful and aware, and also slowing down. It takes some time to actually do these things. So you're like, in terms of the I guess the practical aspect of the way that you're having sex, you're just like a lot more present with what's happening in that moment. You're actually paying a lot more attention to things, not only how you're feeling physically and noticing sensations in your body, but also it kind of brings that extra element of, well, how does this feel kind of like atmospherically or energetically, or just kind of what's the vibe, what's the mood here? What do I notice with that kind of intuition sense that I have? Which for me personally, I had never been doing when I was having sex. I was just kind of going through the motions, and sex was great. It was pleasurable, but there was no extra element to it, I suppose, that the first time I practiced, one of these tantric sex exercises, I was like, wow, this is, it was a completely new experience for me. So, so if I kind of share from that space, not very long at all, right? You don't have to implement every single one of the things that you might read or that you're hearing me suggest. Like, you might just try making sound the next time you have sex and notice how that feels, and that could totally change. It did for me when I first started making noise when I was having sex. It radically changed the experience that I had. But you might like to just try breathing with your partner next time and slowing things down in terms of the thrusting that you're doing, to be a bit more mindful of, like, oh, okay, I'm giving to my partner, or my partner's kind of giving to me, and there's this sharing of energy here. How does that change the dynamic of the experience, to bring that little bit of extra reverence or sacredness into the container? So I would say, not very long, but if you want to get like a good grasp and try to bring all the elements together, I suppose it'll take a little bit longer. And I would say, like, depending on how often you're practicing or how often you're having sex, you could probably like start to get a pretty good grasp on putting all the things together. About a month of just like paying attention to these things and practicing them and noticing how they feel, you could probably get into a good rhythm, and have a tantric sex session, and start to kind of play around with it a little bit, without getting too wrapped up in, oh, am I doing my breathing right? Am I doing my squeezing right? Within about a month, I reckon.
Excellent. Well then, listeners, that's your homework for tonight. Started.
Totally.
Probably not. We're all aware of the benefits of sex. Are there specific benefits you believe from practicing tantric sex?
Yeah, I mean, the benefits are things I kind of alluded to already. Is like there's like more noticing. So a lot of the times, particularly for, like, I work with a lot of cishet men, and a lot of times these guys that I work with are just kind of going through the motions when it comes to sex, and there's this almost like a sense of disconnection from the actual experience that they're having. And so a benefit of tantric sex, like I was mentioning before, is that it really brings you into the present moment, because you've got to be focused, I suppose, on kind of what you're doing, and noticing all these separate and different things. So the benefit there is like really starting to fine tune your connection to your partner and your connection to your own body, which, like I said, for a lot of, at least for a lot of the men that I work with, they struggle to have, or they don't have, or they haven't thought about before. So that's one of the benefits that I think is like really specific to tantric sex. And as well as, like, if you're already practicing spirituality, if you've already got an existing spiritual practice like yoga or meditation or prayer or something else, bringing the sexual element through like tantric sex, or through just bringing like the integration of spirituality and sexuality together, can really amplify and intensify your spiritual practices, right? I kind of think of it like this: is like sexual energy for me, to put like a real concrete definition of what I'm talking about, is say you're doing something physical, like like maybe you're at the gym, or you're just like doing something, maybe you're helping someone move, you're helping them lift a couch or whatever it is, but you're doing something physical. You're going for a run, physically exerting yourself, and someone who you find attractive kind of enters your field of vision. You kind of notice them out of the corner of your eye. Oh, they're pretty good looking. And they maybe flash you a smile, and you're like, oh, they kind of notice me, and they flirting with me a little bit. And you get this kind of little burst of physical energy. Maybe you run a little bit harder, or you kind of straighten up a little bit more. You lift that box that you're carrying just a little bit higher, or you go for an extra rep at the gym. And that little burst of energy there from that spark of attraction, that's what I refer to as sexual energy, right? That's that little burst that we get. But we can play around with that little burst. And the key to knowing about that sexual energy is that it's not dependent upon that other person, right? That came from within you, and you can explore that more, and you can bring that into anything that you do, like a yoga practice, for example, or a meditation practice. Can you bring that little burst of sexual energy in and expand it and work with it and feel it in different parts of your body? So in terms of like, I suppose, I think I drifted away from what the question was, but like in terms of like exploring tantric sex as well, and like just I guess like in terms of exploring your spiritual practices in general, that'd be something that I encourage people to do, is like notice that little spark of attraction that they have, notice that little burst of sexual energy that they might get anywhere, and see what it feels like, and remember it, and see if you can bring it into like the next time that you're being sexual, either with yourself or with your partner, and see if you can play around with that a bit more.
Cool. And it's probably a fairly obvious one, really, but your surroundings, I guess it's really important to consider those as well, the where and your ambiance, if you like.
Right.
Before you get started.
Totally, man. And so this is like what I refer to as creating a container for your experience. And, again, similar to maybe if someone's practicing yoga, they might, put their yoga clothes on. They might lay down the yoga mat. They might light some incense. They might put on a particular type of music. They might make sure that they're in a quiet environment, quiet space to do it, maybe in a certain room of the house. All those things that you're doing are essentially creating a bit of a ritual experience for yourself, and not ritual in kind of the mundane, everyday kind of ritual, but ritual in the sense of like, okay, this was an intentional thing that I did because I'm doing this particular practice. That you can bring that same thing into the sex that you're having, and a lot of tantric sex is about ritualizing the experience in the sense of like being really intentional about, okay, we're going to maybe, it's some very simple examples like, okay, light some candles, or put a particular type of music on, or wear a particular type of clothing, or put some particular type of bed sheets down, or whatever it is, right? There's this very like straightforward examples, but it could be something completely unique to you and your partner that kind of says to you psychologically, okay, we're doing this with intention and there's a reason for it, and it's kind of bringing that extra mindfulness and that extra awareness to the space and to the container, which is kind of the language that I use for this. Like, how are you creating this container for you guys to explore this sexual, spiritual experience together? But then it's also important to, once you've kind of created the container or opened that container, is also then to close it as well. So at the end of like a yoga practice, you might wrap your yoga mat up, you might, blow a candle out, you might turn the music off. Similarly, when you're practicing tantric sex, do you pack some things away? Do you kind of close the space down in a certain way? What are you doing as a closing practice? For example, are you deciding to have an orgasm at the end of your practice to signify the end of that experience, or are you choosing to have an ejaculation at the end of that experience to close down the practice, or are you not doing that? Are you going to do something else to kind of close down your experience and to kind of pack away that container so that you can open it up again at a later time? Again, those things, like there's intentionality, there's mindfulness, and there's an awareness there that oftentimes non-tantric sex just doesn't necessarily have.
Obviously, we're Love Honey and we sell sex toys, so a bit of a loaded question, but do you think toys can be involved within tantric sex?
I personally think they can. I know, because I've been in that community before, that there'll be some tantra teachers who would disagree with me, some tantric sex practitioners which will say no. Who cares? Because my opinion is what matters right now as I'm speaking. And my opinion is we can bring them in. And the way that we can is by essentially the same principles I've been talking about, that intentionality, that mindfulness, that awareness, applying those things to the toys as well, like specifically choosing a toy that you want to explore with, or, and one of the reasons why maybe some other practitioners are not super into toys is because of the vibrations and that added extra stimulation. And so if you are kind of like not wanting to do that, there's plenty of toys out there that don't vibrate, that don't have that extra, intense stimulation. And you can choose one of those and explore something that incorporates a different element into your experience of touch, for example, right? How does it feel to explore this novel stimulation? How does it feel to explore this particular type of toy, and the sensation that elicits? So again, applying those principles of like awareness, mindfulness, sacredness as well. Like, are you gonna, you can bless a toy, you can consecrate a toy. There's all these extra like added things that you can do with a kind of a quote unquote foreign object to bring that into your space and kind of make it part of your sexual experience in a really ritualized and spiritual way that that I think can be really a really beautiful practice. But that's my opinion.
And like you say, it's your opinion that counts. You're on our podcast. Is there anything else, Cam, we haven't touched on you think people should know about tantric sex?
In terms of the basics, tantric sex is oftentimes not goal-oriented, right? So the things that I've been emphasizing here is like intentionality and mindfulness and awareness, and that is kind of what the practice of tantric sex is. It's not okay. It's not like, okay, we got to orgasm, or it has to look a certain way, or we've got to, have an ejaculation, or we've got to do a particular type of sexual act, which, oftentimes sex can be very goal oriented for a lot of us. So tantric sex is kind of about taking that goal away and just kind of being in the present moment and noticing what pleasurable sensations are arising. And also like what other sensations are arising as well. Oftentimes in these really like strongly held containers where we're very intentional and mindful about the experience that we're having, other emotions can pop up, and it can actually be quite an emotional experience, particularly if you're like practicing another tantric exercise, which is eye gazing, which is holding your partner's gaze softly and breathing together and not breaking that eye contact for a couple of minutes. That can also be a very emotionally charging experience. And so tantric sex and creating that container that I was speaking about before is also about like kind of welcoming those other experiences and emotional sensations that can arise when we're having sex, and not pretending that they're not there, or not trying to push them and sweep them under the rug, but welcoming them in and essentially having a space for you to experience and to heal those things that are arising for you. And so that's something I thought is important to bring into this conversation, as well as like when you're practicing these things a bit more intentionally and mindfully, that other emotions can arise up, especially if you're starting to slow down and notice more.
So, got any kind of resources or books or TV shows or whatever it might be that people might dive into to start their journey on this?
Yeah. So there's a book that I would highly recommend, which is called Urban Tantra by Barbara Carrellis. She's been practicing Neo Tantra and classical Tantra for a long time, and has really easily read and accessible approach to Tantra in her book, Urban Tantra. And there's also Mantak Chia's work, if you're interested in like the Taoist perspective that I kind of spoke about before, the kind of tantric Buddhist practices. He's got a book called The Multi-Orgasmic Couple, as well as The Multi-Orgasmic Woman and The Multi-Orgasmic Man. But the Multi-Orgasmic Couple, I think, is really a good resource for people that are very new to practicing any type of spirituality in their sex life, I suppose. Mantak Chia gives some really basic and foundational practices. It requires a little bit of deciphering the language, but there's some really practical stuff in there alongside Barbara Carrellis' Urban Tantra, which I would recommend. And
what about yourself, Cam? Where can people find you online, or indeed out in the real world?
Right. So two places online would be my Instagram, which is at the Cam Fraser. In fact, that handle at the Cam Fraser is me across all social media platforms, so people can tune in with me on social media. And then I've also got a website, which is cam-fraser.com. And I haven't offered anything in person for a little while yet, but I'm feeling the itch to do something live again. So if people are tuning with me on social media, they'll be able to find out when my next in-person event is.
Brilliant. Thank you. So that brings us to the end of this week's show. And to say thank you for listening, we're giving you 15% off any Love Honey purchase, whatever you fancy. You can just check out the links in the episode description and claim your discount. And if you've enjoyed this week's episode, don't forget to give us the rating you think we deserve. Maybe tell your friends and drop us a review. We'd love to know what you think. And don't forget to come back in 2 weeks' time for a brand new episode. Thanks again for joining us, Cam. That's brilliant.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks for listening. Bye.